In fact, a large part of many perceptions about Native Americans, both in North and South America, is the result of what we would call in modern language outright propaganda. When white colonizers saw the way of life of the Native Americans, they were actually shocked. Many traditions and customs of local tribes, particularly in hygiene and medicine, truly shocked Europeans. Regrettably, this shock was related to the fact that European concepts of hygiene at that time were fundamentally different from those of the Native Americans. For example, the Native Americans' use of an analog to modern chewing gum initially caused a sharply negative reaction. Local tribes actively used a mixture of bitumen and sapodilla tree to freshen their breath. When Europeans tried this chewing gum, they felt slightly unwell. Consequently, they concluded that this product was dangerous for health. Of course, Europeans were disgusted by the tradition of cleaning teeth with urine, which was actively practiced by the Aztecs. However, for fairness, let's remember that urine was also used for teeth whitening in ancient Rome. It should be added here that in 19th century America, brown and black teeth were considered a sign of strength and wealth, which was categorically unacceptable for Native Americans. Before we talk about other hygiene procedures of Native American tribes that were considered horrific from the colonists' point of view, let's note that the Aztecs, for example, were very concerned about underarm odor and took the process of eliminating it quite seriously. Badian, for instance, wrote in 1552 about how the Aztecs recommended solving the problem of unpleasant odor. Let the foul-smelling person enter a prepared bath and thoroughly wash their armpits. Let them bathe for a long time, then take the ground plant, Chiravahihutu, and rub it on. The plant's juice smells like flowers. It may seem strange, but the first thing that really disgusted white colonists was the widespread use of baths by Native Americans. Different tribes called these baths by different names. For example, the Yurok tribe called them sweat houses. Other tribes used open hot geothermal springs as baths. It should be said that the Native Americans' attitude towards cleanliness was somewhat maniacal. The aforementioned Yuroks visited the sweat house even after intimacy with a woman, and every morning a Yurok man had to perform this ritual to be blessed by the spirits for successful and lucky fishing. According to Native American beliefs, what flows through one channel of life feeds aversion to defiling contact with the contents of other channels. Therefore, even simply urinating in a river or lake was not just strictly forbidden, but such a violation could result in quite severe punishment. Women during their menstrual periods were also not allowed to approach water bodies to avoid accidentally defiling the water and harming the fish, which could be offended and leaving the tribe to starve. Childbirth and breastfeeding were also often written about with disgust by male colonists, their wives, and European female settlers. They were particularly struck by the fact that women of Native American tribes often gave birth lying on sand. However, everyone forgets that sandbeds were specially prepared to spare the woman in labor from many problems that could arise when the tribe was nomadic. The sand allowed maximum protection of the woman from dirt and infections during childbirth. In cases where a woman gave birth in stationary conditions, the birth usually took place either in a bath or in a hot spring. Interestingly, even breastfeeding infants was approached very thoughtfully by Native American women. They believed that colostrum was poison for the child, so the baby received the breast only when real milk started flowing. Moreover, feeding a child was so important to Native Americans that even the father had no right to try to get intimate with his wife during the feeding period. This is not practiced in many modern families even today. Regarding latrines and shamans, Europeans were struck by the fact that Native Americans did not create common latrines, considering it a sign of barbarism and savagery. However, from the Native Americans' point of view, creating latrines would have been a sign of barbarism. Native Americans relieved themselves away from dwellings in dry places. They believed that creating a toilet did not prevent flies from reaching human waste, and flies, as is known, would spread infections and disease over vast distances. Therefore, Native Americans gave their waste to the sun and wind, which quickly dried it out and prevented flies from starting their carousel of spreading filth. As for shamans, for the sake of fairness, it must be said that the Europeans' disgust was quite understandable. Perhaps it was the shamans who caused the most revulsion. Despite the fact that the shaman, as a person communicating with spirits, was respected in every tribe, he had to perform quite horrific procedures on himself which caused only shuddering and disgust. To cure the sick, the shaman often took the disease upon himself, and to appease the spirits, he was obliged to perform various sacrificial rituals, such as piercing his tongue, making cuts on his body, driving cactus and tree needles under his skin, and sometimes even piercing his own genitals. Of course, such a tradition could not be understood or accepted by the white man. Regarding horrific hygienic inventions, of course, today, from the perspective of a civilized person, one might say that Native American views on hygiene were backward. But again, for the sake of fairness, it should be said that for their time, Native American tribes were very progressive. After all, the ban on Native Americans visiting baths was introduced by the colonists, and it was introduced under the threat of death penalty. At a time when almost nothing was known about painkillers in Europe, Native Americans actively used preparations made from the so-called stupefying herb during medical operations. Interestingly, using this herb for pleasure was strictly forbidden. Another invention not initially accepted by Europeans related to how Native Americans treated the sick by piercing their veins. In fact, as has long been proven by archaeologists, Native Americans used syringes long before the arrival of the white man, through which they introduced solutions prepared from mixtures of various herb decoctions into the body. Finally, the white man was surprised that mothers fed their children from something that looked externally like an intestine. In reality, this was the first prototype of a feeding bottle made from a bear's intestine treated with resin and oil. Native Americans discovered that a bear's intestine kept breast milk fresh for quite a long time. A hygienic procedure initially not accepted by Europeans was the Native Americans' practice of pouring some powder into their mouths. In fact, this turned out to be quite an effective way to get rid of toothache and gum inflammation. Native Americans made powder from the xanthoxylum bush, which they even nicknamed the toothache tree. Most interestingly, any Native American woman had a real first aid kit with her. Thanks to such kits, Native Americans knew how to quickly get rid of ticks on the neck, fleas, dysentery, and stomach disorders. Finally, incredibly but true, Native Americans had in their list of medicines even modern analogs of quinine and eye drops. The famous American white pine, which Europeans used for building masts, was used by Native Americans as a powerful medicinal and hygienic agent that relieved swelling and even treated malignant tumors. In other words, we can say that all the horror that Native Americans practiced is actually quite commonplace and mandatory in the modern world. It can be acknowledged that Native American tribes were very advanced in terms of hygiene and many areas of medicine,